Part 1. The Life of an Egyptian Queen. When history falls into oblivion, the desert wind blew silently through the stone columns of Karnak. The hieroglyphs were worn away by time, but in the moonlight, a few characters still mentioned a woman. Not a mother, not a wife, but a queen. A queen so powerful that her name was heard in the rituals of Amun. And then she disappeared. No tomb, no statue, no mausoleum, just a silent void between two dynasties, between divine light and political darkness. In the world of the Egyptian pharaohs, women were not just the rear. The queen, often called the great royal wife, had a ceremonial and religious position as important as the pharaoh. She was the only one who could stand by the king during the Amun sacrificial ceremonies at Thebes, or accompany him into the shadow temple, where only the spirits of the royal family were allowed to be present. On the political level, the queen could act as regent, especially when her sons were young. Names like Ahotep I, Hatshepsut, and Tai, wife of Amenhotep III, all show that women could run the state if they had the support of the royal court. But that power always came with threats. The closer a woman was to the throne, the more likely she was to be a political target, forced to step down or erased from the inscriptions of later dynasties. And so, many queens, despite having reigned or held supreme influence, have been deliberately forgotten by history. Life in the palace, incense, vows, and darkness. A queen's day began before sunrise. She awoke in the palace as open but closed inner quarters, where light filtered through the high wooden ceilings, casting a pyramidal glow over her in a ritual welcoming of Ire. She did not eat with the king. Her meals were prepared separately, sometimes in a ritualistic diet of barley bread, figs honeyed, and date wine mixed with myrrh. Each dish was tested for poison, because her presence could tip the balance of the court. The queen's quarters were more than just a place to rest. They were private ceremonial centers, with small shrines to goddesses such as Hathor, Isis, and sometimes the war goddess Sekhmet. Queens often served as priests in fertility rites, which ensured the harvest and the royal line. Outside, maids and eunuchs took care of the day-to-day affairs. But inside, she spent hours each day studying, reading papyrus books of ritual instruction, practicing hieroglyphics, and sometimes making personal notes on ritual copies, something that surprised archaeologists when they discovered female handwriting in some of the sacrificial papyri. Title and iconography. Goddess among mortals, the queen's name was more than just a name. It was a symbol of power. On many reliefs, she was often shown wearing the Hathor crown, or wearing a double crown, representing both Upper and Lower Egypt. Some queens, such as Hatshepsut, even appeared with false beards, a symbol for a male pharaoh, as if to assert that she was a king in women as clothing. What's unusual is that queens usually did not have their own pyramid, except in extremely exceptional cases. Instead, they were buried in a communal tomb, or a hidden tomb, to avoid forces that would erase her name from the collective memory. So women who once held noble titles, who were worshipped by thousands, did not leave behind a single stone statue with their names, or their names were chiseled away from the temple walls. When speech is cut off, history turns to dust. The Egyptians believed that a soul could only survive if its name was still mentioned, and that was the most terrifying thing, to be erased from the afterlife. That is why there may be great queens whose names we never know. They lived, ruled, loved, died, but not a single inscription survives to tell their story. Many modern historians suspect that the unexcavated tombs in the Valley of the Kings may contain the remains of one of these women, a queen whose own dynasty deliberately hid her. And on nights like tonight, when the moon shines down on the golden sands of Egypt, perhaps we are walking down ancient corridors where a queen once lived. Only no one remembers her. And among all the buried names, one name shines through the darkness like an unquenched flame, Nefertiti. But Is that really her real name? Or is it just an illusion created by time? Part 2. A faded figure in history, Nefertiti disappears. In the 14th year of the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the heretic king of the 18th dynasty, a name that had resounded on temple walls, on stone tablets, in ritual poetry, suddenly disappeared. Nefertiti, the great wife, the most powerful queen of one of the strangest dynasties in Egyptian history. There is no record of her death, no tomb, no royal funeral. She simply disappeared from history. Nefertiti, more than just a beauty icon. In the modern imagination, Nefertiti is the embodiment of ancient beauty. High neck, delicate cheekbones, piercing eyes. Her image is immortalized in the famous bust discovered in Amarna in 1912 by the German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt. But behind that artistic icon was a real woman with enormous political influence, unprecedented religious power, and perhaps a forgotten pharaoh. Her name, Nefertiti, meaning the beautiful one has come, is associated with a tumultuous period, the religious revolution initiated by Akhenaten. When this pharaoh abandoned traditional gods, such as Ammon, Isis, Osiris, to worship only the Aten, he moved the capital to Amarna and broke thousands of years of Egyptian tradition. Nefertiti was not just behind him. She stood before the Aten in sacrificial rituals, sometimes with the pharaoh's crown, sometimes alone, dispensing power. No previous queen had been portrayed so close to the divine. And then, at the end of her reign, she disappeared. A sudden cut in the historical record. Egyptologists agree that around Akhenaten's 1214th year, records of Nefertiti abruptly end. The monumental stele at Amarna, which once depicted her alongside her husband and daughters, switched to new figures, or the king alone. In her final years, her name disappears from both ritual texts and archaeological sites. There have been many theories because the gap is so unusual. Hypothesis 1. She died of illness or poisoning. But if so, why was there no royal funeral, no memorial stela, no images depicting her in the funeral pose, something that was almost mandatory in Egyptian culture? Hypothesis 2. She fell out of favor and went into exile. However, the power she had, not just through marriage, but through religion, makes this unlikely without a coup. And there is no sign of domestic violence at this time. Theory 3. She ascended to the throne under a different name. This is the most compelling theory, and one that is gaining more and more support. Nefertiti, the unnamed pharaoh? Many scholars believe that Nefertiti was either Pharaoh Smenkhare or Nefertiti, names that emerged shortly after her disappearance, during the turmoil between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. Some texts refer to Pharaoh Nefertiti, meaning beauty of Aten, which was Nefertiti's second ceremonial name as queen. In an inscription in the South Amarna building, the ruler Nefertiti signs, Pharaoh, beloved of Akhenaten, a phrase never before used for a male king. One theory is that she continued to rule after Akhenaten's death, as pharaoh with supreme power, before being replaced by Tutankhamun. This would explain why many of the original objects in Tutankhamun's tomb, bearing the name Nefertiti, have been chiseled away, replaced by the name of Tut. The traces of a dynasty are erased. Why was her name erased? It is possible that her leadership of a pagan religion prompted the later dynasty to want to erase all traces. Smenkhare, or Nefertiti, is never mentioned in the Orthodox inscriptions of Horemheb, who restored the old religion and discarded all references to Aten. If Nefertiti was the leader of such a cult, it was inevitable that her name would be erased from stone tablets, temples, and even popular memory. We may be talking about one of the greatest female pharaohs in history, who once ruled alone, but was erased from all subsequent dynasties because she worshipped the wrong god. And to this day, still no tomb. The search for Nefertiti's tomb is one of the most haunting journeys in modern archaeology. In 2015, Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves published radar scans of Tutankhamun's tomb, suggesting that there may have been a secret chamber behind the cliff where a female pharaoh, possibly Nefertiti, was buried. However, to this day, no official excavation has been announced, and so Nefertiti remains undiscovered. No remains, no tomb, no name. Only a bust, not part of any tomb, as if history has left only her face, while hiding everything else. But was Nefertiti the only case? Or how many other female pharaohs of Egypt have existed, have reigned, and have been erased, simply because they were women on the throne? Part 3. Myth or Truth, when female pharaohs were erased by history beneath each layer of chiseled relief. Between the lines of hieroglyphs that stopped halfway are traces of a past that was once suffocated. Not every pharaoh was remembered. Not every queen was allowed to live forever. In ancient Egypt, sometimes, the power of a name was the reason it had to disappear. Damnatio Memoriae, when history willfully forgets. Damnatio Memoriae is a Latin term used in historiography to describe the act of erasing an individual as name, image, and memory from the historical record. Although associated with ancient Rome, the concept existed much earlier, especially in Egyptian culture, in a form that was both deeply spiritual and political. The Egyptians believed that if someone's name was erased, their soul would not be able to survive in the afterlife. Name is the divine essence, part of immortality. To erase a name is to erase existence. That is why the removal of a name from a stone tablet, the defacing of a monument, the removal of a portrait, is not only a political punishment, but a second death sentence, eternal. Historical examples, when pharaohs are also forgotten. We have seen this with Hatshepsut, the famous female pharaoh of the 15th century BC, who ruled for 22 years as king of Egypt instead of queen. After her death, Thutmose III, her successor, ordered most of her statues to be destroyed, her name removed from the chronicles, and engraved over them with his own or his ancestors' names. Her tomb was hidden in the Valley of the Kings, the entrance buried. Or Akhenaten, the founder of the monotheistic religion of Aten, who was considered a heretic by later pharaohs. His name was erased from every stele in Thebes. His tomb was abandoned. The city of Amarna was abandoned. And here is the thing. The erased figures were often those who disrupted the order, religious, gender, or succession. A woman calling herself Pharaoh. A man renouncing Amun. A woman leading a new religion. Egyptian history has not forgiven them. An unnamed pharaoh. Nefertiti, Nefertiti, or someone else? Most Egyptologists agree that between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, there was a figure who reigned for several years, probably a woman. But the identity remains a matter of fierce debate. The name Nefertiti was once written in the Amarna text with the words, "the chief beloved wife of the great king Akhenaten," but was later erased and written over with Tutankhamun's name, clearly a Damnatio Memoriae. There is no definitive confirmation that this is Nefertiti, but the items in Tutankhamun's tomb, the gold mask, the burial casket, the lacquered chest, all show traces of altered names. Some of the items are female in form, but the names have been changed. Was Nefertiti really Pharaoh, but her name was erased by later dynasties, such as Ai or Horemheb, to restore the orthodox line and eliminate the heretical dynasty? The disappearance was not accidental. It was political design. Nothing in Egyptian history is accidental. The disappearance of a name, especially that of someone who was at the height of power, was often the result of a systematic, planned campaign carried out by the priestly class or the successor king. Imagine you are Horemheb, a non-royal general who took the throne after the deaths of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. To consolidate orthodoxy, you must erase all vestiges of the deviant religious period. In that campaign, Nefertiti, if she was a heretic pharaoh, or even a female pharaoh, had to be erased from the national memory. The Aten temples were destroyed, Amarna was abandoned, and everyone who reigned between Akhenaten and Tut, all were erased. We do not know how Nefertiti died, where she was buried, how long she reigned, because her entire story may have been reconstructed so that it is no longer a story. When history is a void, and the void speaks, it is paradoxical. The more names are erased, the more we sense who the real threat is in the next dynasty. It is precisely that void, the deliberately created void, that echoes the inextinguishable questions. Why erase a woman from history if she never reigned? Who is strong enough to make the priesthood fear her name? Do the unopened tombs in the Valley of the Kings hide her true name? In your sleep tonight, you can hear the wind blowing through the chiseled stone corridors. On the wall, a faint depression, perhaps the name of a female pharaoh, who once existed, who once lived, who once knelt before her. But history, like a faithful but dishonest scribe, has chosen to remain silent. Part 4. The Last Dream of a Queen, when history sighs silently in the misty night of the Amarna Desert. A figure sits on an old stone step, her hand tracing the cold stone as if tracing a memory that has just been erased. Behind her is a faded statue of the Aten. In front of her, the Nile flows silently, as if time has never had a beginning or an end. The last night, when power turns to ashes. Imagine the last night of Nefertiti, or any female pharaoh whose name has been erased. No more courtiers, no more ceremonies, no more trumpets signaling her as she walks down the hall. She is no longer the great consort, nor the ruler of the two lands. In the darkness, there is only one person left, not a legend, not an emperor, but a woman stepping out of the drama of power to prepare to do the unthinkable, to withdraw herself from human memory. We do not know where she was that night. It could have been a small room in the ruined Amarna palace. It could have been a tomb under construction in silence, or a cave that no one had ever entered. But in our historical dreams, we imagine her awake, looking out over the Nile, knowing full well her name was about to be erased. When a person writes her own disappearance, modern scholars have debated for decades whether Nefertiti was murdered, overthrown, or actually disappeared of her own volition. There is evidence that some female pharaohs, such as Hatshepsut, had their statues erected without names, or had their names carved in paint that would fade. Perhaps they knew that their presence was temporary, and that their names would not last as long as the priestly or male-dominated bloodlines that followed. It has been suggested that Nefertiti chose to withdraw either to protect her descendants, to keep the Aten legacy from being erased by violence, or simply because she understood that power always has a price, and she had paid it. Imagine a queen sitting and writing her name in black ink on a piece of papyrus, then folding it up, placing it in a sealed chest, hiding it in a niche, not to be found, but to not be found. She did not need to be remembered. She only needed to be forgiven. Memory, not a stone tablet, but something that exists in dreams. Although there is no written record of Nefertiti's death, and no tomb or statue, the paradox is that her name has never been completely forgotten. Not because any dynasty preserved her, but because her disappearance itself was a strange tear in the veil of history, large enough to make every generation of historians bend down to scrutinize it. Her memory lives on as an unanswered question. How did a woman who once shared the throne disappear without a trace? Why did her image survive for 3,000 years in an anonymous statue, when all the others were destroyed? We have tried every way to touch history through inscriptions, geological layers, mummies. But in this case, the absence itself is the message. When history is left with only a sigh, in the final hours of the video, we no longer ask, who was she? How long did she reign? Or was she really Pharaoh? But only listen to the sigh of a soul who once stood before the altar of the sun, God, who once stood on the same level as the ruler, who was engraved in stone with the most noble name, the beauty who came, and now no one knows where she is. But no one has forgotten her name, because perhaps that name, though chipped from the stone, still whispers in the wind, in every chipped statue, in the gaze of scholars who still reread the inscriptions day and night. Nefertiti. Her name is no longer on the monument, but in the minds of all mankind. If you are listening in the middle of the night, close your eyes. Imagine you are standing in the Amarna desert just as the sun has set. On the cracked rocks, you see an inscription, faint, almost gone, but you read it in the last light. I once ruled. I once loved, and now I ask permission to forget.